Hi, and welcome to the 21st FKMCD Oxitec Public Educational Webinar. Our topic is One Health, Environmental, Human, and Animal Health in the Florida Keys and beyond. Our speakers are Bob Eadie, Administrator and Health Officer of the Monroe County Department of Health, Dr. Doug Mader, Veterinary Specialist and Fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine. Chad Huff is FKMCD's Public Education and Information Officer. Rajiv Vajanathan is Oxitec's Director of U.S. Programs. And I'm Meredith Finsom, a Florida native and Oxitec's Head of Public Affairs. We began this series of public educational webinars to share information with residents of the Florida Keys and provide forums to answer questions. Webinars are open to everyone. They are recorded and made available after the event. All questions relating to the webinar topics will be answered. We will group similar questions together. If time runs out, we will accept questions in writing via florida@oxitec.com. You can begin to enter your questions in the chat box now. You don't have to wait until the Q&A portion begins. You will remain anonymous. We won't identify you. We just want to answer your question. And we'd like to give priority to Keys residents. So if you live in the Keys, if you could let us know which Key you live on, we'll give priority to those questions. So our agenda, first we'll hear from Bob Eadie about mosquitoes and their impact on public health. And then Doug Mader will present on mosquitoes and your pet's health. These are both independent presentations, and at the end of their presentations, we'll begin with your questions. Also wanted to flag our project website, keysmosquitoproject.com. You can find documentation and other resources available there. Bob, over to you.
Well, hello to everyone. A few housekeeping details is I want everyone to know that I am receiving no compensation for this presentation, and I have no connection with Oxitec in any way other than I have agreed to serve with this environmental advisory group that we have just to try to make the process a lot more user-friendly in a way like that, but it's also very important. And so with that, let's get started. I will try not to read my slides as they come by because that would put everybody to sleep, but there's a lot of good information, and I didn't do them, so it's not tooting my horn. But a lot of good information that is important. I think that I recommend that afterwards you go back and review some of these. It's a lot of information, but there's a lot of information that you're going to get also that you'll probably want to review some if you have any interest in it. And so why is this important for Monroe County, which is the Florida Keys? The control of mosquitoes is vitally important. The truth of the matter is, if you didn't have mosquito control and air conditioning, we wouldn't have anybody in the Florida Keys right now. Or if you did, they would be, you could probably count them on one or two hands as opposed to the thousands we live here. If you want to see what it's like, in old Florida used to be go into the Everglades, and you'll find out. I swatted my leg once while I was up there fishing, and I think I killed 3 different species of mosquitoes as they were eating on me. But aside from just that mental health challenge and the anemia challenge of being drained of blood and going crazy from them, there are some serious consequences with regard to mosquitoes. In fact, you talk about the dangerous animals in Africa. You talk about venomous snakes. You talk about whatever you want. Dr. Mader can get into that. But really, the most dangerous animal in the world is the mosquito. I mean, it kills more people on a yearly basis than any other cause combined. And for us is in South Florida, you've got over 200 locally acquired or travel acquired dengue cases. We had as recently as 2020 in the Keys, 70 locally acquired cases. And back when all this got kicked off, back in 2009, 2010, there were right at 100 cases of dengue that were locally acquired. And that was a major event in that it had been 70 years since we really had an outbreak of any major proportion of locally acquired dengue. Fortunately, that lasted about a year and then went into to remission, I guess is the best way, because I don't think we will ever eliminate dengue and some of these other diseases, because I don't think you'll ever be able to eliminate all of the mosquitoes totally, and they are the vector that carries it. And so as we move along, the diseases that you want to look at specifically for mosquitoes that we're concerned about, because it's all around us in Central and South America, is Zika, chikungunya, and yellow fever. And there's a particular house mosquito, the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is the house mosquito that carries these diseases, and we can touch base on that too. But they're hard to get at, and when we get to the lifestyle, we can go from there. But you can't spray them away. Chemicals will be important. Pesticides will be important always for mosquito control, but it is not the answer to everything for a whole variety of issues, including environmental issues and other things like that. So if we are going to combat diseases, we need to be able to have as many tools in our toolbox as we can. And the environmental impact for us in the Keys is major. We have the several butterfly that are endangered or threatened, as well as other animals that we want to make sure that we protect. So to see how it transmits with mosquitoes and why it's important, just to have a basic background, is you have some host, and it can be several things. It can be a monkey, as perhaps with monkeypox, or the Gambian pouch rat with monkeypox, which is not mosquito-borne, but it's a reservoir. Probably the most striking for a reservoir are birds for West Nile virus. It was one of the fastest moving diseases that you could have with mosquitoes. You had a bird that got infected, mainly crows and blue jays, which fortunately we don't have that many in the Keys, but they host the virus. Mosquito bites that bird, and then mosquito bites either an individual or a horse. One thing to remember as we go forward, which can help us with some of controlling diseases, is there's got to be a critical mass. You've got to have enough of that reservoir of disease and have it transmitted enough to individuals so that the disease itself really doesn't die out because of the life cycle of it. So you have to have enough mosquitoes, enough disease, and enough people to be able to continue it. And if you can break those cycles, that's how you control it. And it's like any communicable or infectious disease. If you can separate the infectious agent or the communicable agent away from host, humans or otherwise, you can break the cycle of the disease. There are, 3,500 species of mosquitoes. I've learned all of this in the last decade. I've learned more about bugs than I ever thought I would. Interestingly enough, which I think is somewhat fascinating, there are 46 different species of mosquitoes in the Keys. And some that carry, and you see here, if I'm hoping that goes around, but you see where the Aegypti is: dengue, yellow fever, chikungunya, and Zika. For the rest of Florida and the country, as well as us, you have different mosquitoes, but they carry diseases that are just as dangerous as other, and just as impactful on us in Florida. And the life cycle, I'm not going to dwell on this, but as it goes around, and the thing here is when you have the mosquito that is infected, when we'll go on from there, the Aedes aegypti mosquito is not like other mosquitoes that'll do one bite. It will continue to be infected and will continue to bite several times, which makes it a more effective carrier or transmitter of the disease. And for our purposes here and for Oxitec, when we've been through that, you look for the mosquitoes. The female mosquitoes are the ones that bite. They feed on blood. That blood that they use to mature their eggs before they lay them. But if you don't have males to fertilize the mosquito, then the females, then you won't be able to keep reproduction going. And going back to what I just said, if you can break that cycle of continually have enough of a reservoir of the disease, you can break the transmission of the disease. And here's the culprit right there. And the best way to describe that mosquito, because we all know it lives around man, it's evolved to live around man. It can live in your closet. It lives under your steps. It lives in all the places that that mosquito control, as good as they are, can't really go and get. It lives in your bromeliads. It lives in your gutters. I mean, it has evolved over thousands and thousands and thousands of years to be around man. And that's why it's an effective transmitter for the diseases that it can. And the best way to identify them, they are the small mosquito that are extremely fast, extremely skittish, and that you almost, it's impossible to swat when you want. When you start to think about swatting, they will have lifted off and go somewhere and they'll bite somebody else. That's the issue for us. And here's just a slide that really says what I have been saying. And our concern, like I said, is it has evolved to be around man so much that it is just highly effective. In fact, human beings are basically its only prey. And here's a slide that shows that the mosquito itself, the Aegypti mosquito, was an old world animal for years and years and years ago. And you think, and I show this slide because I think it illustrates a lot of where we are today. You have it come out of Africa, you go and you get some into South America, into the Caribbean, back into Europe, and then and you can see how it flows into Asia. And that's this mosquito. And what you were seeing there, let me go back to that just a moment. What you were really seeing there is the beginnings of modern times, in the sense you were having so much more interchange between isolated or distant places of the world. And that interchange brought not only trade and everything else, but that interchange is also being able to transmit vectors or also diseases from one spot to another. I think it's interesting that there's a great deal of scientific research going in that thinks that perhaps the New World had more people in it than the Old World before Columbus discovered America, but that the diseases brought by Europeans into this hemisphere just decimated the population so that it seemed like it was very sparsely populated. So it's important to us. It's important in the Keys. And when you look at dengue, which we really worry about too, is an interesting thing is 80% of the people that are infected won't ever know they've got it, even though half the world's population could be at risk to get it. And the issue with that, not to get too technical, but there are 4 different types of variants, shall we say, the easiest way to think of it, like when we talk about COVID, but there are 4 variants that are the same disease, but with some variations. That if you get one kind, you'll be immune to that. But the problem is you may be more susceptible to the other kinds, so that if you're exposed to different mosquitoes or in different locations, you can get dengue infection again. And the problem is you're much more likely to have serious effects from that infection. So that's a real concern. And the numbers that you see are just staggering. And the thing is, there's no cure for it. There is no vaccine for that, although there has been enormous amounts of efforts over 50 years to try to come up with a dengue vaccine. It's not been possible. It may be now with the RNA, the messenger RNA vaccine development that's going on. It seems to be there promising results there, but it's still the thing that needs to be done if you're trying to manage the disease is somehow how to figure out how to keep the vector from going from being infected to infecting other people. And for the Keys especially, as just for human interest, I guess, the first head of the State Board of Health was Joseph Porter. For those of you that have been in Key West, you know the Porter House is downtown, and that's where he came from. He was asked to go to Jacksonville and form the Board of Health, and the reason for that is because he successfully dealt with an outbreak of yellow fever in Key West. And what really happened was that he quarantined ships coming into Key West for a period of time until whatever symptoms of the yellow fever went away, and then he would allow them to come ashore. And he followed up, and when he was doing that was right at the time that Walter Reed was doing his research to prove that it was mosquitoes that transmitted yellow fever. And then with Gorgas and with a Cuban named Finley, all of their research was such that they proved it was the Aedes aegypti mosquito. And as you can see, this mosquito, even back in those days, in the 17 and 1800s, it went as far as Philadelphia and Boston. Fortunately, you do have vaccines for this now and more supportive treatment. But you will find in the history of public health that yellow fever was one of the drivers for having a Board of Health established throughout the country. And these slides that I'm not going to go into that much detail other than to show you how widespread another mosquito-borne disease can be. And the same thing when you get to Zika. And Zika, fortunately, and I do give a great deal of credit to mosquito control and to us at the health department. Zika scared me more than anything I've ever had in my 40-year career in public health. It sort of came out of nowhere. The effects of it were just devastating on pregnant women and their fetuses. And there's no vaccine and no specific treatment, but the results could be just devastating if you look at some of the pictures. And so let me go back for just a second to this. If you look at this map again, this was the 1500s. We'll start with that. If you look at a map just like this today, and you put in air routes, and you can actually, if you want, put in the actual planes in the air, it will look like spaghetti has been laid all over. It looked like a child had scribbled. It is almost covered up totally with air routes coming all over the world. Literally, you can be anywhere in the world, and 36 hours later, you can be anywhere else in the world. It's almost hard to believe, but it's, I guess, to show you the extent of some things is like monkeypox, which is not a mosquito-borne disease at all. They had an outbreak back in 2009, which was caused by the importation of the Gambian pouch rat. Why anybody would want to import a rat, I'm still not sure, but everybody's got to be somewhere. But anyway, that jumped from in pet stores from the imported animal into prairie dogs, and then prairie dogs to humans. But though this time around, and monkeypox is endemic and has smoldered in certain places in Africa, sort of like Ebola has done that too. But out of Western Africa, the latest outbreak, and there's a great deal of migration from sub-Saharan Africa into Spain, into Italy. But the outbreak that we had that was international came from 2 rave events in Europe. They traced it back to, and the raves are where people get very close together, and you had rubbing up against one another, and that's the way it's transmitted. And if you think about coronavirus, not the coronavirus that did COVID, same sort of thing. It just appeared. We thought it could be controlled, and it just continued to go and go and go, and then went around the world. Zika, which is kind of interesting. Zika started right here back in 1947, which was a hell of a long time ago, because that's when I was born. But from there, it has it sort of went to West Africa, and then somehow into Asia, into Pacific Islands or whatever, around the world. And where it really emerged was in Peru. And so all of a sudden not Peru, in Brazil, excuse me, in Brazil, but and then we have it in the United States. So there is movement all around. Another fact for you to know with regard to the Keys is when we had our first dengue outbreak back in Key West in 2009, the CDC and the health department did a survey to check the residencies and the origins of everybody in a radius around the guest house where the first case was determined. And after that, we interviewed and got like 200 and some odd people that we actually interviewed, which is about 1%, a random 1% of Key West population. In that random 1% population, every continent on Earth, including Antarctica, had been a place of residence for that random 1%. So I just say that to show why all this is really important, is because you have diseases that can do a great deal of damage to us as human beings, and that we're exposed to. It just happens. We're an international destination, and so that's why it pays to know what's going on. That's why when you feel bad, because all the symptoms are going to be pretty much the same, you're looking at real flu-like illnesses. So if you feel that way, you should check and get with your doctor. I think it's interesting with those that have severe dengue symptoms. If you have no treatment at all, the mortality rate somewhere about 19%. If indeed you can get treatment, because there's no cure, but you get pain relief, you get hydration, you get make sure that you have nourishment and nutrition, pain relief, hydration, the mortality rate drops to 1%. So that's why it's important for us to have all of the methods that we can to try to break the cycle of passing diseases through mosquitoes. And there are other diseases out there, like I said. So if we have an international health clinic here at the health department, if you are going to travel, give us a call, 305-292-7500, and we can advise you as to what vaccines you need and can administer them to you. So give us the time. Sometimes you have to have multiple shots, and then other times we have to order the vaccine for you. But without a doubt, if there is a vaccine that will prevent a disease, I surely recommend it to everybody. It is the best thing you can do for your health. In fact, I think vaccinations and clean drinking water would do more to elevate public health worldwide than anything else. So thank you. And if you have questions, we'll get to them at the end.
Well, I'm Doug Mader. I'm local. I've was born in the Upper Keys, and I've lived here now for over 25 years. So mosquitoes are certainly a big part of my life, as they are yours. And I want to thank Oxitec and the FKMCD for the invitation to come and share some of my expertise with all of my fellow conchs and freshwater conchs as well. Before I get started, I do need to take care of some legal stuff, and that is I want to just make some disclosures. I also, like Bob Eadie, am on the advisory group for Oxitec and the FKMCD mosquito project. However, I am not on their payroll for either Oxitec or the FKMCD, and I'm not getting compensated for this lecture. So I'm doing this because I want to participate and I want to share information to the rest of you to make sure that we're all on the same page about keeping our pets healthy. Bob did a fantastic job discussing how annoying mosquitoes can be, and more importantly, how deadly they can be. I think anybody who's stepped outside in the last minute has probably come in contact with a mosquito. I know post Ian, we had some incredible swarms because of all the flooding and stagnant water around the Keys. This is a picture of just a human arm that had been bitten multiple times. And obviously, depending on the species of mosquito, certain mosquitoes cause a lot more irritation than others, and certain people are more susceptible to the irritation than other people are. That's a whole nother lecture. But what I want to point out with this slide is that the female mosquitoes are the ones that bite, and they are bloodsuckers, and that's how they nourish themselves. And that is unfortunately also how they transmit disease. And, it's pretty obvious. All you have to do is go outside, and you know how susceptible we are. Keep in mind that a lot of us have pets, and mosquitoes affect our pets just like they do people. And a lot of us have dogs that live outside. A lot of us have cats that live outside. But you also have to remember that mosquitoes come in the house, and they hitchhike. They'll come in on your clothes. They'll come in on you. They'll come in on your pets. They'll come in if a door or window is open or if you don't have screens. Bob did a really nice job discussing the importance of mosquito-borne diseases or mosquito vector diseases in humans. And here's an example of some of the ones that he talked about and a couple others. But what I want to do is just talk about some of the diseases that are transmitted via the mosquito to our pets and other animals in the Keys. Now, on the upper left-hand side of our slide, we see the equine encephalitis, and there's different varieties of that, and then West Nile virus. We're going to lump those together, and I'm going to talk mostly about West Nile because that's a biggie. We have that here in the Keys, and it affects horses. Equine encephalitis affects horses. We can get into some other species as well, but I want to talk about horses because they're a companion animal. The big thing, too, is allergic skin disease. And just like I showed you the picture of the person on my first slide with the horrible skin reactions, and then heartworms, which is something that tends to be downplayed, but actually is a bigger significance than the diseases that Bob talked about. We have more heartworm disease here in the Keys than we do dengue, chikungunya, Zika, and all the other viruses that are vectored by mosquitoes. So just to give you an example, we know, I just showed you the picture of the dog with the mosquitoes. So here's a kitty cat with a mosquito on his face. Horses are plagued by mosquitoes, and they're a big vector for diseases in horses. Yes, I know a lot of you don't like iguanas, but many of the reptile species are also susceptible to mosquito bites, and birds. Many of us have pet birds. And of course, as Bob brought up, birds can act as a vector for the disease itself. I want to approach the West Nile from the veterinary side of it, from the human companion side of it, human companion animal side of that. And that is, West Nile virus is an arbovirus that's carried mostly in the corvids. And the corvids are the crows and the blue jays. And Bob mentioned that we don't really have them down here, but in fact, in the Upper Keys, we do. I've never seen blue jays beyond Channel 5 mile marker. But if you get up to the Upper Keys, you see blue jays all the time, and same as crows. But it's also carried in some other species of birds as well. But what I want to mention is the fact that the birds tend to be the carrier animal, and they carry the West Nile virus, and horses tend to be one of the sentinel animals in terms of susceptibility. And when a mosquito bites a horse, generally in about anywhere from just a few days to a couple of weeks, the horse will get sick. And it can be real mild, and the owner may just notice the horse go off food or just act lethargic for a couple of days, and then it'll self-heal, just like a lot of our diseases will do that. For instance, the flu virus or the common cold, and you don't have to run to the doctor every time you get a snuffy nose. Unfortunately, though, especially in horses, many of them don't recover. And the ones that don't develop neurologic signs, they start head pressing, they circle, they fall over, they wobble, and then they can die. And that's sad because it is a disease which we do have a vaccine for. There is an equine vaccine for West Nile virus. And that's important because we can use it in the horses. And so far to date, there are a couple other species that been some studies that have shown that the equine vaccine works in them as well. Some of the other species here in the Keys, I've actually personally seen cases of these. I've had only one case confirmed of a dog that died from West Nile virus. I've had 2 cats confirmed that died from West Nile virus. Several birds, mostly raptors. So we're talking about things like hawks and owls. A couple of them are high profile that belong to tourist attractions, and they've developed West Nile if it's caught early. And again, as I mentioned, sometimes these are self-limiting, and there are no pills or shots you can take to make it go away. Supportive care, they can live. And believe it or not, we had one dolphin that was a confirmed West Nile, and this was about probably 15 years ago. Fortunately, that animal did live. Now, of all of these, the West Nile vaccine has only been shown to be effective in birds. And they haven't shown it to stimulate an immune response in all the species of birds, but in the raptors like the owls and the hawks, and some of the other larger birds like ratites, ostriches, emus, it does seem to make a difference. But I know a lot of the zoos are vaccinating their bird collections with West Nile virus vaccine for horses, and they've seen what appears to be a good success. This is anecdotal. There haven't been some controlled studies on that. The other thing I want to bring out, it's kind of an interesting point, and that is reptiles, some of them can develop West Nile virus and die. But the important thing is that West Nile virus can what's called overwinter. Now, we don't really have winters here in the Keys. I know when it drops down into the 70s, we all freak out and put on our sweaters and jackets. But in other parts of the country where it's warm in the summer and you have mosquitoes, and in the winter it gets cold and you have snow and ice, the reptiles will brumate, which in mammal terms, people call it hibernate. Well, the mosquito bites the rattlesnake when it's warm. The West Nile virus gets injected into the rattlesnake's blood. The rattlesnake then overwinters in its brumation state or in its hibernaculum. Then when it wakes up in the spring and warms up, another mosquito bites it, picks up the West Nile virus and spreads it to a horse or a person or a dog or some other species. Interestingly enough, it can also attack alligators. And I've had this question, how does a mosquito bite the alligator? And it goes after the soft tissue. So for instance, in the picture in the upper left of your screen, there's a mosquito biting the conjunctiva, which is the soft tissue around the outside edge of the eye, where there are no bony, thick keratin scales that protect it from the mosquitoes. That's all it takes, is one small area where the mosquito can take a blood meal, and it does it right around the edge of the eye. About 15 years ago or so, we had a massive outbreak of West Nile virus in two of the alligator farms in South Florida, and we lost several dozen alligators. And I know that may not seem like a big deal to you, but it is a big deal, especially to the alligator industry. And I'm not going to get into the ethics of selling alligators for meat and for hides, but if an alligator gets West Nile virus and it lives, because again, there is no treatment for it, it ruins the hide and they cannot sell the hide. So it's a huge economic loss to these alligator farms when West Nile gets into one of their herds. So it is a big deal. So we do take these mosquitoes very seriously, and they can spread some pretty nasty diseases. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is just the mechanical trauma and allergic skin disease that we see with mosquito bites. Now, I mentioned to you, and I showed you in the original picture, the person's arm that had all the bites all over their arm. I'm one of those people that when I get bitten, I get very large welts and I get very itchy. My wife, bless her heart, when she gets bitten, she'll slap them or the mosquito will fly away and it doesn't bother her. So she's pretty lucky. But there are some people, and it has to do with chemicals that are exuded from our skin. Some people are definitely more attracted to mosquitoes than others. Well, so are animals. Animals produce a lot of those same chemicals, and animals can also be highly susceptible to mosquitoes and irritation. So this is my dog. I'm ashamed to admit it, but this is my dog on one of our typical morning walks right after Hurricane Ian, and the salt marks mosquitoes were swarming like crazy because of all the pooled water after the rains and the floods. And you can imagine, if that were you, how completely uncomfortable that's got to be. And in fact, some animals like this little dog here, just like that woman and just like me, react terribly to the mosquito bites. So this animal's covered with welts secondary to all of these horrific mosquito bites. So even if it's not transmitting a disease, you've all been bitten by a mosquito before you know how uncomfortable it can be. Well, this is an interesting condition that we see in cats down here in the Keys. And these are mosquito bites, and it's an allergic reaction to mosquito bites that cats get on the soft tissue where they don't have fur. Now, typically, the mosquito doesn't bite through the fur. It's going to bite in areas where there's exposed skin. And so, again, the nose, the lips, around the eyes. There is no treatment for this. There are creams, there are steroids you can put on it. But really, the only thing you can do is keep your cat indoors. Again, that's another subject and another lecture for another hour. When you let cats outside, they're going to wreak havoc on our local wildlife. And I'm probably pushing some buttons by saying that, but I'm a pretty firm believer in that. These cats should be indoors. Once they develop this condition, they really need to be kept indoors, because you will not cure this. Eventually, that can change and makes them more susceptible to developing things like squamous cell carcinoma, which is a cancer of the pale colored skin that we see here in the tropics. So that's a serious condition. The treatment, keep them indoors. Here's an example of a horse with mosquito bite allergies, just like the dog I showed you. And once again, you can only imagine how uncomfortable that's got to be. Now I want to move on to probably the reason that I developed my relationship with FKMCD and Oxitec, and that is talking about the mosquitoes and heartworm, which is a very serious, potentially deadly disease carried by mosquitoes transmitted to animals. And if you can see on this slide right here, I've pointed out with blue arrows where we live in the Florida Keys, and the American Heartworm Association, which keeps track of the spread of this disease in the United States and around the world. But here's a map, and it shows that we're in a fairly high risk area, seeing anywhere from 6 to 50 cases a year. And I can tell you for a fact, in my hospital that I had in Marathon, which is a referral hospital, we were treating 4 to 6 cases a month. So that's 50 to 60 cases a year of heartworm disease, which is a disease which is preventable on so many levels and so potentially deadly if it's ignored. So people ask me what the animals are susceptible to heartworm disease. Mammals pretty much can get it, but for our purposes today, dogs and cats, of course, are very susceptible to heartworm disease, and so are ferrets. So those are the 3 animal groups that we're going to talk about. But I also want to point out that there have been a number of cases where aberrant hosts, such as humans, have actually developed heartworm disease. Now, it's extremely rare, but you don't want to be in the hospital getting treated for heartworm disease alongside of your dog, your cat, or your ferret. So keep in mind, it is a significant disease. People don't get it from dogs and cats and ferrets. People get it from mosquitoes that carry the disease. So let's talk a little bit about how it's transmitted. And I want to reiterate the fact, and this is extremely important because I see these posts on social media all the time that are incorrect. Only the female mosquito bites and transmits disease. Male mosquitoes do not bite. They do not transmit disease. So the female mosquito bites a heartworm positive dog and then ingests the blood meal. And then once the heartworm larvae from the dog get inside the mosquito, they develop into what's called the infective stage. The next step from there is the larvae develop inside the mosquito. That can take usually several weeks. And then another mosquito comes along, or that mosquito then travels along and then bites another host. So it could be a dog, a cat, a ferret. And then it transmits those infective larvae to the dog, the cat, and the ferret. Now, while they're in the dog, the cat, and the ferret, then those larvae have to develop, and that can take, depending on the species, usually a couple months for these larvae inside the dog, the cat, and the ferret to become infective. And after about 4 to 5 months, these larvae now become adults. When these larvae become adults, that's when they start causing disease in the dog, the cat, or the ferret. Once the adults are produced, they cause severe disease, and then the female adults start producing more larvae. Another mosquito comes along, bites the infected dog and cat, and then transmits it back to another naive dog, where the cycle starts all over again. So you can see this is pretty darn significant. Now, I know this is a gross picture, and I apologize if you're eating dinner while you're watching this, but the adult larvae in the dog live in the right atrium, the right ventricle, and in the pulmonary artery. So it chokes off the blood flow to the lungs. And on the lower left-hand side here, you'll see an example of surgical removal of these larvae, which is end stage. Normally, if we catch them early, we can treat it before you have to go in surgically and remove it, but you can see that ball of worms. Now, contrast that to cats and ferrets, which generally only have a single worm. Very rarely do you have more than one worm. So they do develop disease, they do develop heart conditions, but it's not as severe as it is in dogs. The other thing that's important is that with the dogs, because they have so many adult females, it's easy to detect the disease. It's not as easy to detect in cats and ferrets until they go into heart failure. So how do we diagnose heartworms? Very simply, we can draw a blood sample. Oftentimes we'll see the larva floating around in the blood. So you can see this picture, the red arrow is pointing at one of the larvae floating around in the blood. You can do that with a microscope. Veterinarians can do it in their office. There's also a quick test, kind of like Not the same thing, but kind of like the COVID tests that we take when we go get tested. It's called a SNAP test. Veterinarians can do that in their office. You have the results in less than 10 minutes. And if you have a positive case, you can start treatment. X-rays are extremely important before you treat, because if they're in heart failure, and this is an X-ray of a dog in severe heart failure secondary to heartworm disease. And you can also experience, ultrasonographer can see the heartworms actually in the heart. And when you do the ultrasound, you can see the worms swimming around. This happens to be a cat, so there's only a single worm in the ventricle right there. Now, it can be treated if caught early. It is extremely expensive to treat. Be aware of that. It also can take about 4 to 6 months to treat if you catch it early. And then they can get the disease again if you don't try and prevent it. So the best thing to do is to prevent the disease. It's so much easier to prevent than it is to treat. And so whenever you get a chance to prevent something, I don't care if it's a human disease or an animal disease, make the effort to prevent it. Don't close the door after the horses run out and try and chase it and treat it down. There are 22 different species of mosquitoes that carry heartworm in this country. And as Bob Eadie said, there are 46 different species that have been identified here in Florida. What's important to know that is we don't live in Michigan. We don't have seasons where things freeze. So we have mosquitoes year round down here. So heartworm disease is a year round disease. They must be on heartworm preventatives year round. Otherwise, if you live in the Keys, your animals will get heartworm disease. So how do we protect our pets from heartworms? You know, pets are our family. This is one of my dogs. I would cut off my arm to do what I can to save it. There are many different products out there. I don't work for these companies. I just wanted to point out that there are pills and there are spot-ons. Over here on the right-hand side, Canine Advantix 2 not only kills heartworms, it kills other parasites. It also repels mosquitoes, but notice on the bottom right, it says never use in cats. Extremely important because it can kill a cat. There's also topicals, which are spot-ons. Advantage Multi works really well in dogs. It doesn't do mosquitoes. And in cats and ferrets, Advantage Multi for cats is also labeled for ferrets. So you can use it in cats and in ferrets, and these are topicals. That's extremely important because, again, cats and ferrets can get it. How do we prevent it? Try not to walk your dogs outside in the crepuscular times, which are the morning hours and evening hours when the mosquitoes are most active. Never, ever, 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 and if I didn't mention it, never use human products for mosquito repellents in pets. Extremely dangerous, and you will kill your cats, okay? They do make pet-safe products, and again, I don't work for these companies. I'm not endorsing them. You can go online, but make sure you find something that is endorsed for animals and safe to use in animals. You can also plant your yards with plants that repel mosquitoes like lavender, catnip, basil, rosemary, citronella. It smells really nice and they're really good preventatives. And that's my time limit. I just want to invite you to ask any questions that you have, and I'm more than happy to answer them. And again, I want to thank FKMCD and Oxitec for the opportunity to share my passions about animals, about the Florida Keys, with all of you. Thank you very much. Hand it back to Meredith.
Thanks, Doug and Bob. I think we both learned a lot through your presentations. Just want to remind everybody in the audience, don't be shy. If there's a question you're curious about, please ask it. We'd love to answer it. We will not identify you. We're going to go ahead and get started with some of these questions. And Chad, I think you might be the best person to answer this first one. I know it's something that FKMCD has been asked about a lot. It's when are all of the dengue cases in other parts of Florida going to come to the Keys?
Well, the good answer to that, Meredith, and I have to thank Bob Eadie for this. It's if the Florida Department of Health in Monroe County and Florida Keys Mosquito Control have our way, never would be the answer to that. But seeing our proximity to these cases and knowing the way that people come and go, in and out of a county. Remember, the only thing that the difference between a travel case and a locally originated case is basically geography. That somebody has to travel to the Keys that has dengue, and then the mosquito picks it up and vectors it and then turns around and spreads it, so it can happen very easily. So what we in the health department want to focus on is as Dr. Doug said, prevention. That the absolute best way to prevent you or your family from getting this disease is just to stop being bitten by mosquitoes, and that's use your DEET products on yourself, on your human self, not on your pets, but try to avoid being outdoors during those peak feeding hours, which we see at dusk and dawn. So, mosquito control and the Department of Health will work as hard as we can and have been working as hard as we can to keep it from happening. But you guys have just as much power as anybody else, and that is to use those products and to be sensible, especially now that it's cooler. Wear long sleeves, keep from getting bit, and you'll keep from getting sick for sure.
Thanks very much, Chad. The next question, Rajiv, will send this question to you. The question is, do mosquitoes get sick with dengue or these other diseases?
Thanks, Meredith. So they don't necessarily show the same pathology, of course. When we talk about dengue or West Nile virus, we talk about muscle ache and fever, things that are very specific to humans and to other vertebrates. Mosquitoes do get infected, and yes, in fact, they do show pathology, but the kind of pathology we see is typically, say, affecting female reproduction. It might infect, for example, with dog heartworm or other worm-like parasites in mosquitoes, it can affect their flight. So the worms actually compete with mosquitoes for flight fuel, thereby limiting their flight radius. So they do have some pathologies in the gut or in the flight muscles when they are infected with these viruses or these parasites, but it's not the same as you would expect in a vertebrate like a dog or a bird or a human. More to the point, that kind of infection finally results in an infection of the salivary glands of the mosquito. So when the female feeds a second or third time, she can transmit those parasites during salivation, when she spits in you, basically, and those parasites can be transmitted to the next host.
Great. Thanks very much, Rajiv. Okay, the next question, Chad, this question will go to you. It's an FKMCD question. Is FKMCD going to use this technology to combat the Aedes aegypti? Oh.
I've been so conditioned to mute myself, I forgot to unmute. I'm sorry. I'm assuming by technology we're talking about the Oxitec technology.
I think so.
That it really remains to be seen. That the district has made it very clear that we are open to looking at and trying out novel techniques in mosquito control. And obviously with the Oxitec, their technique focusing on the Aedes aegypti mosquito, it is certainly one that we are very, very interested in. But a couple of things have to happen first. First of all, it has to be shown, at least to us, to be an effective countermeasure. We know that it has worked well in other parts of the world, and we're in our second phase of a trial here in the United States, the first of its kind in the country. So we need to see what the outcome there is to make sure it's desirable, and then after that happens, if those two answers are if those are yes, then Oxitec has to have a product that they can sell. Right now, it's not an approved product, and it's not something that can go to the market. So it has to be approved for use in the keys. And then the last hurdle would be our board. The FKMCD board, as it does with any of our techniques, would have to look and see if it's a cost-effective countermeasure. But I can tell you this, we're interested in exhausting all those avenues to see where it leads. So right now, I would like to say yes, but it's still a work in progress, but we're giving it the same consideration that we would give any other countermeasures that are novel in this regard.
Great. Thanks very much, Chad. Okay, the next question, Bob, this will go to you. It's how many cases of dengue have there been in the Keys this year? And what about the rest of Florida?
Well, like we said, for this year, less than 10, I believe, the last time I had checked. And for the rest of the state, I am not sure right now. I know we were over 200 in South Florida. For that, for the entire state, I don't know, because you can have travel-related cases that would be 1 or 2, but the real concentration for us so far has been in Miami-Dade and Broward.
Okay, thanks very much, Bob. The next question, Doug, will go to you. And if it's okay, this is going to be kind of a two-part question, and they're somewhat related. The first part of the question is, are mosquitoes the most concerning pests for pets in the Keys? And then the other question is about fleas and whether they vector any disease.
I would say that's a very good question. And both of those pests are, I would say, equally as annoying and problematic. Yes, fleas carry disease. Probably the most common one we see down here is something called Ehrlichia canis, and that affects the blood and the ability of the blood to clot and other pathologies as well. But if a dog gets Ehrlichia canis and it's not treated, they can die. Fortunately, it's a fairly easy disease to test for. Similar, in fact, we use the same SNAP test that we use for heartworm to test for Ehrlichia. And frequently when we draw the blood sample, we'll test for heartworm, for Ehrlichia, and then a few other diseases at the same time. And so we have all the answers at once. And if we catch them early, then we can treat them. Again, prevention or early intervention is key. And let me just make this point, and that is, this is why it's so important to bring your pets to the veterinarian for annual exams. Because remember, for every year that all of us grow older, the dog's growing older 7 years. And we should go to the doctor and be checked at least once a year, not every 7 years, especially as we get older. So all the more reason to bring your pets to your family veterinarian. And it's a simple, inexpensive blood test, and you can screen and pick up a lot of these diseases and catch them very early, oftentimes before the symptomatic, which is when you want to grab them and treat them and prolong that human-animal bond.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Next question, Rajiv, I think this question will go to you. What is an arbovirus? Is that a virus of trees?
All right, Dr. Mader mentioned arboviruses, and that's a contraction for arthropod-borne viruses, arboviruses. So West Nile virus, for example, Eastern equine encephalitis, Zika, dengue, these are all arthropod-borne viruses. And they may be a spillover from animals, in which case they are zoonotic diseases, or they may be transmitted from human to mosquito to human without an intermediate animal reservoir. That's what arbo means. It's arthropod-borne.
Thanks very much, Rajiv. And we're just about at time, but we have one last question and we're going to send it to Doug. I think something a lot of us are curious about is, how do dolphins get bitten by mosquitoes?
Oh, that's a really good question. When they sleep at night, they sleep with their melon or the top of their head out of the water, because remember their blowhole is up here. So at night when they're sleeping, the very top of their melon is out of the water, and that's skin. And so they will get nailed by mosquitoes all around the top of their head at night. That's a really good question.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all to our presenters and also to the audience. And just want to remind everybody, this probably was our last webinar for this mosquito season. So look forward to seeing you for the series again next year. And in the meantime, visit our project website. This recording, along with the 20 webinars we've done previously, will all be available there along with other resources. But thank you all again. Goodbye.